Okay, so let's talk about the difference in the ways that we can say VOLTAR. We have a couple of different ways that we can say VOLTAR. There's actually more than just a couple. There are a few ways that we can say VOLTAR. So let's take a look. First, we start off with return, which is not only VOLTAR, but it's also devolver. So we can use return with clothes. I need to return these shoes. I need to return this hat. I need to return this hair because it didn't work out like it was supposed to. So we can use return as devolver. And actually, there's a section. If you go to a big supermarket, not supermarket, like mega market, like Walmart, one of the superstores, they have an area that's for returns because they get so many things coming back, so many products coming back that they have an area for returns that someone later on in the day, someone goes and puts those all back where they go and they try to sell them again. So if we want to say thank you, VOLTAR, then we can say, so ter que is have to. So you have to, we can say you have to return or you have to come back. And the get phrases and phrasal verbs almost always, especially get phrases, but phrasal verbs like phrasal verbs with come are almost always more informal. So it means the same if I say you have to return. Then the meaning of it, semantically, it means the same thing to say you have to return as it does to say you have to come back. But it's much more formal to say you have to return. Like I would look at my sister weird if she said you have to return, because it sounds like, you know, my mom. I always joke about my mom, how she thinks that she lives in the 1800s in a Jane Austen book, and she might use something like you have to return, but it sounds like something from Jane Austen or Henry James or something in some old British writer in Victorian, I think it's Victorian, I don't even know, Victorian age or whatever that is. So you have to come back is more what we would use today in our day-to-day lives. So you have to come back. And then we have these three interesting options. You have to come back, you have to go back, and you have to be back. So let's look at each one of these. You have to come back. And the thing about come back and go back is it's one of the only things in English that is based on where the speaker is more than where the hearer or the listener is. It's much more, it's swayed much more by where the speaker is than where the listener is. So for example, let's say I am leaving Brazil. Let's say I'm going to London. So I'm going to London. Then if you are here, so I think all of the members of our class are in Palmas. If you are here in Palmas, you can ask me, when are you going to come back? When are you going to come back? I could say, well, I'm going to come back in 2 weeks. I'm going to come back in 2 weeks. Perfect. Okay. Quando você vai voltar? Eu vou voltar em 2 semanas. So then I go to London. I'm in London. I have been in London for a week. And I call, let's say I call Amanda, and I'm talking to Amanda on the phone. And Amanda asks, quando você vai voltar? Which one is she going to use? Quando você vai voltar? She's going to ask, when are you going to come back? Because she's talking about voltar para cá. So come back, the best translation for to come back is voltar para cá. So for example, she wouldn't say, when are you going to come back to the United States? Because Amanda is not in the United States. Amanda's in Brazil. So she couldn't say, when are you going to come back to the United States? She could say, when are you going to come back to Brazil, where she's at? She could say, when are you going to come back to Palmas? Because that's where she is. But she could not say, when are you going to come back to the United States? And she could not say, when are you going to go back to Brazil? Because she's in Brazil. She would use come back. Quando você vai voltar para cá? Onde o falante está naquele momento que está falando. Now, so I'm in London. I'm talking to Amanda. She asked when I'm going to come back. Then, o que eu falo? I'm going to go back next week. I'm going to go back next week. Why? Because I'm going to somewhere that I'm not. I'm not in Brazil. I'm in London. So then I'm going to use come back. It's not, in that case, it's not as fixed. It's not concrete that I have to use go back. I can use, if she uses come back, it won't sound extremely weird for me to say, I'm going to come back I'm going to come back next week. Although it's not the most correct option. The most correct option would be, I'm going to go back next week. So then that's what happens. Another week goes by. So I've been in London for 2 weeks. Second week goes by, I return the more formal way, or I come back to Brazil. Why do I say come back? Because it's where I am right now when I'm speaking. So I come back to Brazil, and I'm here, and Amanda in our next class asks, when are you going to voltar para Londres? In that case, what does she say? What would be, so she could use return, but it sounds formal. Doesn't sound like everyday speech. When are you going to return to London? It sounds like almost like a movie. The Return to London. Sounds like some action movie or something. So what is she going to say? She's going to say, when are you going to go back to London? Why is she going to say that? Because she's not in London. She's in Brazil. So she would say, when are you going to go back to London? Interestingly, if she asks me, let's say I'm still in London in the second week, if she asks me, quando você vai voltar para Londres, and I'm in London, she's going to say, when are you going to go back to London também? Porque mesmo assim, ela não está em Londres. Agora, se eu falar, if I'm in London during that second week, and I say, eu vou voltar para Londres no ano que vem, what do I say? I don't say I'm going to go back to London. I say, I'm going to come back to London next year. Or next month. I forgot which one I said. Okay, so I'm going to come back to London because it depends on where the speaker is and not any other factor. It doesn't depend on where the listener is. Doesn't depend on where my mom is. It doesn't depend on any other factor other than where I am when I say it. So a common mistake with this would be, like right now, I'm sitting here in my house in Palmas, and if I'm talking about when I'm going to return to the United States, if one of my students asks me a question, so, quando você vai voltar aos Estados Unidos? So they could think, when are you going to come back to the US? But that's incorrect. When are you going to go back? Even though it's my my country, I'm a citizen, doesn't matter. It's not where I am when the person's speaking. It's not where the person speaking is, right? So that person would then say, when are you going to go back to Brazil? Sorry. When are you going to go back to the US? When are you going to go back to the US? And if they ask, and after you go to the US, when are you going to come back to Brazil? Because that's where the person is when they're speaking. So that's the difference between come back and go back. Again, return, is return easier? Hell yeah, return's easier, because it means come back or go back. Because come back, voltar para cá, go back, voltar para lá. Quando você vai voltar para lá? But return sounds almost Shakespearean. Sounds like you're a movie title, or it sounds like I'm picking on my mom tonight, but it sounds like Jane Austen book that my mom would read, The Return of Innocence. So I think there is an old book, The Return of Innocence, or something like that. The Return to Avonlea, or something like Anne of Green Gables. So here's the thing, though. What I always say about phrasal verbs. So the three worst things about English for Brazilian Portuguese speakers. The three worst things about English for, well, all Portuguese speakers. First is pronunciation. Pronunciation sucks. It's a mess. English pronunciation is a mess. That's the worst thing. Second worst thing is prepositions, because prepositions are so much simpler in Portuguese. And sometimes we have, okay, so dates on Monday, on the 5th, and then I say the restaurant is on First Street, but it's not really on First Street. Oh, well, depends on how you look at it, I guess. So prepositions are the second worst thing. The third worst thing are phrasal verbs to me. Those are the three worst things. In all my experience of teaching English to Portuguese speakers, those are the three worst things. Phrasal verbs are the worst. Why? Because you get two words that most of the time mean different things when they're apart. You bring them together and they mean a third thing. So you have, this means one thing, this means the second thing, this means a third thing when you bring them together. And sometimes that phrasal verb has two or three meanings, like work out, right? Work out, we know work out is, right? Work out is to exercise, but it also means your relationship is going to work out, means it's going to dar certo. So that right there are two meanings of work out. So phrasal verbs can have multiple meanings. But the thing about phrasal verbs is that they are essential because they are what we use instead of the regular verbs that we should use, probably. We should use return instead of come back, go back, but we don't. I don't know why we love phrasal verbs, but we love phrasal verbs. American English speakers absolutely love phrasal verbs, which makes it more difficult for people that are learning English. I like it because it gives me, it's going to give me work for the rest of my life, because I'll have to teach about phrasal verbs for the rest of my life, because there will always be people asking about them. But it does make it more difficult for people that are learning English. So what happens is many times we have a simpler verb like return, which means voltar. And then we have phrasal verb come back, the phrasal verb go back, possibly the phrasal verb be back, which is estar de volta. So nós temos voltar para lá, que é go back, tem voltar para cá, que é come back, e estar de volta, which would be to be back. So you can say you have to be back by Monday. We'll say thank you. And remember, we talked about, in the last lesson, we talked about by Monday, lesson 37. If you want to check out lesson 37, if I remember, I'll put it up and to the right, the link to lesson 37. But you have to be back by Monday, which means when Monday hits, you need to already be here or there. That's the nice thing about be back, is that it doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter where the speaker is. It doesn't matter where the listener is. It just means you have to, você tem que estar de volta antes da segunda-feira. Quando chegar segunda-feira, tem que já estar de volta. Mas de volta onde? Não importa com be. Doesn't matter if it's where the speaker is, where the listener is, where anybody is in that one. But here we go. We have three phrasal verbs that possibly almost all of the situations where we can use these three phrasal verbs, return would work. But it's not what we use, which is one of the most difficult things about English, is that we use these phrasal verbs instead. Same thing we talked about before. Back in lesson 31, we talked about arrive. The simpler verb is arrive. It would be nice if everybody used arrive, but arrive sounds more formal. Why? Because we have the phrasal verbs get here, get there, and get to, and then the place, get to somewhere, get to Brazil, get to New York, get to the bank, get to school, whatever it may be. So there you go. There's it was supposed to be a quick explanation, but it wasn't, about return, come back, go back, be back. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments, or you can hook up with me on Instagram, Prof. Willy Brasil, and feel free to send your questions there. I'll answer them, maybe even do a reel about it. And I will put right over here somewhere a video talking about Shagard and get here, get there, get to somewhere that you can watch as well. Until next time, keep